the inception of Russia has a variety of factors. One would be the Slavic culture of the people there was unlike today, which is a brutalized culture. Um, the Slavs were particularly known for their uh, peacefulness. The influence of the Byzantine Empire, which was the Eastern Roman Empire, on the Russian intellectuals, the Slavic intellectuals for the most part, and the violence of the feudal system imposed by the violent Vikings, people of Scandinavian origin who conquered Russia. This is what gave Russia its particular identity. It was a steppe culture of the Slavs and also the imposition of a Scandinavian elite. And throughout Russia's history, um, much like the English nation after 1066, it has been foreign domination of by the elites, either intellectual or feudal, which has been the primary factor um, right up to the present day. Now this may be changing. You can cite Putin and various other political oligarchs um, as a change in Russia's destiny. You know, and it certainly does need a change. Although I'm not a supporter of Putin. Um, but the other critical historical trends in Russia, because of course if there had been no changes in Russia, the Scandinavian elites, um, which gradually became more Slavic as it interbred with the local population, may have continued on. You know, the one of the most stark things in terms of intellectualism in Russia is the discrepancy, and not only through wealth but actual ability of the elites versus the peasant classes. You know, the boyars, who were the feudal equivalent of knights, I suppose. The barons, robber barons, in Russia, somewhere in between. But it was not uncommon for them in the Middle Ages to be able to read and write. Of course, Greek was, and the Orthodox Church of Byzantium. That's what I meant by the Byzantine Eastern Roman um, influence. You know, rather than Latin and Western Stoic and Epicurean ideas, which were lost and then refound from the Western Roman Empire, and then went into the printing press as that was developed, and Lutheranism and Protestant, which affected Protestantism, and the work ethic, all came from Stoicism, and Epicureanism, of course, went off to the American branch and influenced Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine after the um, rediscovery of the Stoic books by Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, meditations and the discourses, and in the Epicurean um, pathway towards Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine were resulted in the American Constitution, the American War of Independence. Although that was started off by the previous 7 years war between the British and the French, and that was started by George Washington, who later went on to become the one who started the American War of Independence. But we're going off on a tangent here. The critical point for the Russians, I mean, in terms of intellectualism, they've had some of the great intellectuals of the world. You know, um, I think one of them was Tolstoy. He was a polymath anyway. But even at the time, 1066, so one of the leaders of St. Petersburg who offered refuge to Harold Godwinson's family after the Norman invasion was he could speak over 7 different languages. Yet the people on the steppe were still, in terms of superstition and of course the rich folklore of Russia, a rich oral tradition which would result into Tchaikovsky's Peter and the Wolf. Forgive me if I've said that the wrong name there. And the others, and the Nutcracker and all the rest of it, all operas which were perhaps had inception from Western culture, but again showed the inherent ability of the Russians to develop their own intellectual property and share it with the West. That they are a cousin civilization to the West. Of course, the Slavs originated in Asia. They are an Asian people, although they are a white people and European on the surface. As Gorbachev said, we are far more emotional. We are far more aggressive in many ways than the Europeans, and of course, that is one of the tragedies of Russian civilization or development, because of course they were conquered by various peoples. The south was conquered by the Turks to some extent, because the Russians' historical mission, they would say, as seen in the book Tragedy and Hope, which covers all of world history, but as a section on Russia, about the resource exploitation of the peasants was there to fuel a military state, which was ultimate aim is to conquer the Asia Minor, which is now Turkey, and recapture Byzantium to restore the Orthodox Church to Eurasia and the Middle East and the other places where it's formerly most popular. Okay, so the Tsar's mission was that. That is why the Crimean War happened. All that it was strategic reasons for that. That is why it involved the British. The British conquered most of Russia, which is something that's forgotten now, with the Prussians, and then this led on to a schism between Britain and Russia. Of course, they'd been allies in the Napoleonic War before that, but there were various strands of history from the Crimean War which led on to the subduing of Serbian nationalism, a cousin nation to a brother nation to Russia, which of course led to them assassinating Archduke Ferdinand, which started the First World War, and led to Pan-Slavic nationalism in the East, and then it led on to World War II. But the spark would be the Pan-European nationalism of Poland, which attacked the predominantly ethnically German city of Danzig, killing 30,000 people, which put Hitler in a position or in a corner to attack Poland, and then later on, because of the Soviets, the build-up of Soviet forces in the West, he did the same thing with Russia. He invaded Russia because he was threatened. But of course, that brings us on to the topic of the Soviet Union. After the Turks had their way in the south of Russia, the Mongols, of course, came in and conquered most of Eastern Europe, and that prevented Western ideals getting to Russia and Eastern Europe for a long time, caused the schism in Europe itself. Of course, this allowed continued superstition and backwardness in Russia, both economically and morally, to continue, and the schism between the Tsars as they pushed the Mongols back entrenched their position, of course. Now, of course, when the Russians came in and invaded Germany with France in the First World War, the reaction of the Germans was to push them back, and it came to a point where the Germans were winning, and so they then sent the aristocratic and ultra-conservative German elite, then sent Lenin, who was a Jewish communist, to Russia, and he unleashed the Russian Revolution, killed the Social Democratic Transitional Government in St. Petersburg, and that led to Stalin, and of course the genocide, which started under Lenin, continued under Stalin, and in the leaders afterwards. With the Gulag system of death camps, and eventually led to China becoming communist, and the 300 million people killed by the disciples of Marx.